Okay, so you're here for the deep dive, right? And today we're going deep on JFK.
That's right.
We've got all these documents, dispatches, memos, even some pretty fragmented pieces.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is break down each document.
We'll see
what
what
it says and how it connects to the assassination of President Kennedy.
I think that's a great plan.
All right, well, let's jump right in. This first one is called Dispatch from Mexico City. It's dated March 9th, 1968. The file name is 1041007010009.pdf.
Okay.
All right, so this dispatch talks about something called Limix 1 in Mexico City. Seemed like they were gathering political intelligence, especially on the PRI. That's the main political party down there.
Right.
And they were also keeping tabs on any leftist opinions floating around. They were publishing and distributing news.
Interesting.
Looks like they were putting out something like 5,000 copies.
Wow.
And they even had connections with the Mexican press and government.
Okay, so this is 1968. That's a few years after the assassination.
Right.
What could this tell us about 1963?
Well, even though this is after the assassination, it gives us a peek into how the intelligence community was working in Mexico.
Right.
And remember, Mexico has a pretty important connection to Cuba.
Yeah, definitely. Big part of a lot of JFK theories.
Right.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If they were still this focused on tracking political talk and working with the press in 68, imagine what they were doing before the assassination.
Yeah.
Like, how much did those intelligence operations shape what people in Mexico knew?
Right.
And how did that maybe indirectly connect to what happened in Dallas?
All right, let's go on to the next one.
Okay.
Dispatch to Chief, Task Force W, dated July 11th, 1963.
1963.
Yeah, July. File name is 10410V701007.9.pdf.
Okay.
This is about a Cuban agent, Amfana 1. He was recruited and trained by Wave.
Wave?
Yeah.
Okay.
He had a background in intelligence gathering and paramilitary operations.
Wow.
Inside Cuba, he had a whole network of contacts there. But the dispatch says they were worried about his safety.
Right.
Like he might have been compromised.
Yeah.
And then mentioned some of his SA agents, including one guy linked to Cuban Airlines.
Cuban Airlines.
Yeah. Now, this document is just a few months before the assassination.
This is getting close.
Right.
So how does this Amfana one fit into all of this?
Well, it's a big deal because it shows that just months before Kennedy was killed, U.S. intelligence was running agents in Cuba.
Right.
Like Amfana 1.
Yeah.
And we know Oswald was pro-Castro.
Yeah.
And he had his own connections to Cuban affairs.
Right.
Plus Wave, they were all about covert actions against Castro. So them worrying about Amfana 1's safety, that shows how risky this whole thing was.
Definitely.
And this Cuban Airlines connection, that's interesting too.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, we see other people connected to Cuban Airlines pop up in these files. So it seems like intelligence agencies were really focused on Cuba.
Okay.
And there might have been some overlap or maybe even conflict between all these different players.
That makes sense. Okay, what's next?
All right, we've got Report No. S1053, dated August 6, 1961. File name 10410701027.2.pdf.
Okay.
This report came from Israeli intelligence. It lists people connected to the International Institute for Peace.
The International Institute for Peace.
Yeah, they were in several Latin American countries, including Cuba and Mexico.
Okay.
It's got names of politicians, writers, academics.
So this is like 2 years before the assassination?
Yeah, 1961.
What does this tell us?
It gives us a snapshot of the political scene in Latin America during the Cold War.
Okay.
And it shows that U.S. intelligence, with help from Israel, was keeping an eye on anyone they thought was leftist. Or part of these peace movements.
Right.
Now, we don't see Oswald's name on this list.
Okay.
But the fact that there are people from Cuba on it, that's important.
Oh, why is that?
It shows how much the U.S. was focused on Cuban influence in the region.
Right.
And this whole atmosphere of suspicion towards anyone leaning left. Well, that's important to remember when we're thinking about what happened in 1963.
Yeah, it adds context. Okay, let's go on to the next document.
All right, this one takes us back a bit further. It's a memorandum from New York to Washington, dated January 18th, 1952. File name 1041007010296.pdf.
Okay.
It talks about a meeting request for Leah Chern.
Leah Chern.
Yeah. The meeting was with someone who was leaving the Economic Cooperation Administration.
The ECA.
Right, to join the Office of Policy Coordination.
The OPC, okay.
They needed to come up with a cover story for this guy.
A cover story.
Yeah, maybe something about research in Italy. Now, this is way before the assassination, over a decade.
1952.
Right.
So why is this important to our deep dive?
Even though it seems far removed from 1963, this memo shows us something important about how intelligence agencies work.
Okay, how so?
They use cover stories all the time.
Right.
Even back in the early Cold War, if someone switched to a job in intelligence, they had to make up a believable public explanation. So it makes you think, were there similar cover-ups happening closer to the Kennedy assassination?
That's an interesting thought.
It shows us that there was this whole culture of secrecy.
Right.
And that maybe the official story wasn't always the whole truth.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Plus, the ECA and OPC, they were big players in U.S. foreign policy and covert operations.
Yeah, especially during the early Cold War.
Right, so knowing how they operated helps us understand the bigger picture.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's move on.
All right, next we have a routing and record sheet dated September 20th, 1968.
Okay.
File name 10410710021.pdf.
All right.
This one had a newspaper interview attached. It was with Dale Smith.
Dale Smith.
Yeah, an American Black Power advocate.
Mm.
The interview was published in a Norwegian newspaper in July 1968.
Okay.
Smith talks about America, capitalism, racism, communism.
So this is after the assassination.
Right.
Why would this be in the JFK files?
Well, it seems like the JFK Assassination Records Act covers a pretty wide range of information.
Okay.
Not just stuff directly tied to the assassination itself.
Right.
It also includes things about the social and political climate of the time.
I see.
So the fact that they were still interested in American radical movements in 1968 and their international connections.
Yeah.
Well, that shows you the kind of concerns they had back then.
Definitely. Gives you a sense of the tensions in society at the time.
Exactly. Okay, up next is a memorandum dated May 21st, 1971.
Okay.
File 10410710041.pdf.
All right.
This memo reports on Americans who went to the World Peace Council conference. It was in Budapest in May 1971.
Okay.
It lists a bunch of people in the committees they were on.
What kind of committees?
Stuff like European security, the Vietnam War, the Middle East, disarmament.
So again, this is well after the assassination.
Yep, 1971.
What can we learn from this in our context?
Well, it shows that the intelligence community kept a close eye on people involved in peace movements and international political events.
Right.
Even almost a decade after Kennedy was killed.
So they were still monitoring this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
It speaks to those Cold War tensions, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the ongoing concern about threats to national security.
At least as the intelligence agencies saw it.
Right. All right, let's look at the next one. This is a dispatch from Nairobi dated April 30th, 1971. File 1041007110056.pdf.
Okay.
It's all about a woman named Vida Mae Gaynor. It goes into her background, her activities in Tanzania and New York. She was involved in civil rights and anti-war movements.
Okay.
And it even mentions some of her associates.
Who are they?
Her sons and a Jamaican rifle club instructor.
A rifle club instructor?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Another post-assassination document.
So what's the takeaway here?
It shows that even after Kennedy's death, intelligence agencies were still very interested in people involved in civil rights and anti-war activism.
Makes sense.
The fact that they were reporting on Miss Gaynor's activities, both in the U.S. and abroad.
Yeah.
And even her connection to this rifle club instructor.
Right.
Well, it shows how much scrutiny these movements were under during that time.
A time of a lot of social and political change.
Definitely. All right, moving on to a dispatch from March 19th, 1969, file 1041071100102.pdf.
Okay.
This one sends over 3 Norwegian newspaper clippings. They're about Bobby Seale and the Black Panther Party visiting Oslo.
Black Panthers in Norway.
Yeah.
Okay.
The article's called Black Panthers for a Social Revolution.
Okay.
And it quotes Seale talking about the party's goals and their views on America.
So this is after the assassination, too.
Right.
What's the connection to JFK?
Well, this document gives us a sense of the racial tensions happening in the U.S. at the time.
Right.
The Black Panther Party was a major force.
Yeah.
And they were definitely controversial.
Right.
So the intelligence community was keeping tabs on them, even their trips abroad.
I see.
It's not directly about JFK's assassination, but it paints a picture of the domestic environment.
Okay.
All the different social and political things going on in the years after Kennedy's death.
Right. Context.
Exactly. All right, next up is a dispatch dated May 14th, 1955.
1955?
Yeah.
Okay.
File name 1041007100122 .pdf.
Right.
It's sending copies of reports and notes. They're called the cult reports.
The halt reports.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they cover December 28th to January 14th. I think it's late 1954, early 1955.
Okay.
They wanted to use these reports to put together a bigger master report. And there's some praise for the agent's work.
So this is all before the assassination.
Right, 1955.
And what does it tell us?
It gives us a glimpse into the regular intelligence work happening back then.
Okay.
Years before Kennedy's assassination.
Right.
How they were collecting information, organizing it, and analyzing it.
Yeah, a very systematic approach.
Exactly. They had this whole bureaucratic system set up.
That makes sense. All right, let's keep going.
Okay, here's a CADL dated April 18th, 1968. File name 1041007110139.pdf.
Got it.
This one has information from a source called El Nergo.
El Nergo.
It's about Eric Starvo Galt, also known as James Earl Ray.
James Earl Ray.
Yeah, the guy they suspected of killing Martin Luther King Jr.
Right.
They give a physical description, say his whereabouts are unknown, and they want someone to check if the information is reliable.
So this is about Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, not JFK's.
Right.
Why is it here?
Well, I guess investigators and researchers thought there might be some connection between these two major assassinations in the 60s.
Yeah.
It shows how much attention they were paying to political violence back then.
Definitely.
And how hard they're trying to find the people responsible.
Okay, what's next?
We've got a couple of document fragments here. File names 1041007110143.pdf and 1041007110147.pdf.
Okay.
But the excerpts they gave us, they're practically unreadable.
Really? Nothing there?
Yeah, just bits and pieces.
Okay.
So we can't really say how they relate to the Kennedy assassination.
Too bad. Well, it happens. Sometimes the historical record is incomplete.
Yeah. All right, moving on to a cable dated August 18th, 1971.
Okay.
File 1041071100148.pdf.
Got it.
This cable talks about someone called Jepixone.
Jepixone.
Yeah. He hosted Hosea Williams.
Who's that?
He was a leader in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Okay.
Apparently, Williams said he knew JamWave was behind Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination.
JamWave again.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he thought they might be involved in Malcolm X's death, too, but he wasn't sure about that. He also mentioned having trouble getting a visa to go to Peking and talked about his commitment to racial equality.
Okay, a lot to unpack there. But the JamWave connection is really interesting.
Right. That's the same group linked to that Cuban agent, Amphono 1.
Yeah, from that earlier document.
Exactly. So years later, you have this civil rights leader saying JamWave was involved in other assassinations. It's not directly about JFK, but it adds a whole other layer to JamWave's history.
And those questions about the government's role in political violence during that time.
Yeah, definitely.
Makes you wonder what else they might have been involved in.
Okay, let's see what we have next.
All right.
A memorandum dated April 18th, 1960, file 1041007110239.pdf.
Okay.
This one mentions an A case.
An A case.
Yeah, they prepared it for talks with the British. They wanted to get the Brits on board with developing these discussions further.
Interesting.
It's from before the assassination.
1960. So what does this tell us?
Well, it shows that the U.S. and British intelligence were working together during the early Cold War.
Right.
This A case, even though we don't know the details, it highlights the international side of intelligence operations.
Makes sense.
And the alliances that were in place back then.
Okay, let's move on to the next one.
We've got another document fragment, file 1041007110257.pdf.
Okay.
But again, the excerpt is blank.
Nothing there.
Nope. So we can't say how it relates to the Kennedy assassination.
All right, those fragments are frustrating, but I guess they're part of the historical record.
Right.
Just a reminder that we don't always have the full picture.
Exactly. Okay, this next one is a dispatch from June 3rd, 1968. File name 1041007110324.pdf.
Okay.
It's about something called Project Lion Tour.
Project Lion Tour?
Yeah.
Okay.
They describe it as a leftist writer press service in Mexico. It talks about what they were producing, how they were trying to be more effective, and some information about the writers.
Interesting.
It also mentions the Excelsior newspaper and some critical press coverage.
So this is after the assassination?
Right, 1968.
How does this connect to JFK?
Well, it shows that intelligence agencies were still interested in leftist media in Latin America during the Cold War.
Okay.
Project Lion Tour's work, and their interest in critical coverage, like in Excelsior's. It gives us some context for the media landscape around the time of the assassination.
Right, and how information was being shaped and spread.
Exactly. Right, moving on to a cable dated April 19th, 1968.
Okay.
File 1041071100404.pdf.
All right.
This one identifies James Earl Ray. He's using an alias, but they say he matches the description of the guy who shot Martin Luther King Jr.
James Earl Ray again?
Yeah.
Okay.
They give a physical description, his criminal history, and say he escaped from prison in April 1967.
So this is related to the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination.
Right.
But why is it in the JFK files?
It probably has to do with the idea that there might be some link between these big assassinations in the 60s.
Right, like we talked about before.
Yeah.
Okay, what's next?
Another document fragment, file 1041007 110405.pdf.
Okay.
And as usual, the excerpt has nothing readable.
Blank again.
Yep.
All right, well, we move on.
Okay, this next one is an operational and source cover sheet. It's dated February 1st, 1956.
Okay.
File 1041007 210001.pdf.
All right.
It gives administrative details for a report from San Jose, Costa Rica.
Costa Rica.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tells us the date, who got it, but not what the report was actually about. And this is from before the assassination.
1956.
Right.
So what's the point of this document?
Even though it's just an administrative thing, it shows how intelligence reports were handled during the Cold War.
Okay.
And the fact it came from Costa Rica, that might be something researchers want to dig into.
Right.
See what the U.S. was doing down there at that time.
Yeah, could be a lead.
All right, next we have a report dated December 4th, 1961.
Okay.
File name 1041007 210013.pdf.
All right.
This one's about a meeting with Plinio Prieto. He was a Cuban exile in Miami, involved in anti-Castro activities.
Interesting.
It talks about his background, his views on the exile movement, his contacts, and whether he was reliable.
Okay, so this is getting closer to the assassination.
Right, 1961.
How is this relevant?
Well, the Cuban exile community in Miami is a big part of this story.
Definitely.
They had a complicated relationship with the U.S. government.
Yeah.
And we know Oswald had connections to both pro and anti-Castro groups.
Right.
So this kind of intelligence gathering is important.
It helps us understand the whole situation surrounding the assassination.
Exactly. Knowing what Prieto was up to, who he knew, gives us a glimpse into what was going on within the exile community.
Makes sense. Okay, what's next?
We've got a few more document fragments. 1041007 210034.pdf, 1041007 210006.pdf, and 1041007 210212.pdf.
More fragments.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're all blank, so we can't tell what they're about.
All right. Moving on then.
Okay, here's a dispatch dated October 13th, 1967. File name 1041007 210227.pdf.
Okay.
It has contact reports about someone called A. Lacone.
A.A. Lacone.
Yeah. He met with Peter J. DeGarfino.
Okay.
The reports describe A.C. Lacone's activities and movements in September 1967.
So this is after the assassination.
Right.
What can we learn from this?
Well, it seems that intelligence agencies were still keeping tabs on people even years after Kennedy's death. They were watching AMC Lacone, where he went, who he met.
Right.
We don't know exactly why, but it shows their ongoing surveillance.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what they were looking for.
All right, next is the routing and record sheet dated October 18th, 1967.
Okay.
File 1041007 210228.pdf.
All right.
It shows that a document about AMC Lacone from October 9th, 1967 was being passed around.
So this is a follow-up to the previous document.
Yeah.
Okay.
It gives us a peek into the paperwork side of intelligence work, how they shared information within the community.
Okay, makes sense. What's the last document?
Okay, this is a dispatch from May 21st, 1963 from Mexico City.
Mexico City?
Yeah.
Okay.
File name is 1041 1007 21034.2.pdf.
All right.
It's got contact reports from early May 1963.
Okay.
One part mentions a source saying Eusebio Askew was expected back in Mexico soon.
Eusebio Askew?
Yeah.
Okay.
Another part talks about a meeting at the Academia Mexicana de Derechos Internacionales on May 8th, 1963. Someone gave a speech about non-intervention and self-determination.
Okay.
They said it was typical of Mexican policy towards Cuba.
So this is all happening just months before the assassination.
Right, May 1963.
What's the significance here?
Well, remember, Oswald went to Mexico City later that year.
Right.
So this information about Askew coming back and this discussion about Cuba, it gives us a glimpse into the political climate in Mexico leading up to November 1963.
It all adds to the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've gone through a lot of documents. What's the big takeaway?
Well, we've seen a whole range of stuff. Routine intelligence work, operations involving Cuba, all before and after Kennedy was killed.
Yeah.
Some documents seem more directly related than others, but they all help us understand the world of intelligence and the political situation back then.
Right.
It's like putting together a puzzle piece by piece.
Exactly. And that's what I want you, the listener, to think about. How do all these pieces fit together?
Right.
What does it tell you about how hard it is to get to the truth about the JFK assassination?
Yeah.
We've seen glimpses of intelligence operations, surveillance, international relations. How does that make you think about the complexity of this historical event? Look back at the people and groups we've talked about, the dates, the places. What questions does it raise for you?
It definitely makes you think.
Exactly.
There's always more to uncover.
Always.